If you have your Bibles, turn them to Matthew 13. We're going to be reading the last paragraph of Matthew chapter 13. We're going to be talking about the rejection of Jesus. And my study Bible at the top of this paragraph says a prophet without honor. So I want to start reading at verse 53. Matthew 13:53. When Jesus had finished these parables, he moved on from there. Coming to his hometown, he began teaching the people in their synagogue, and they were amazed. Where did this man get this wisdom and these miraculous powers? And they asked, isn't this the carpenter's son? Isn't his mother's name Mary, and aren't his brothers James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas? And aren't all of his sisters with us? Where then did this man get all these things? And they took offense at him. And Jesus said to them, only in his hometown and in his own house is a prophet without honor. He did not do many miracles there because of their lack of faith. This is a real important event in the ministry of Jesus. And we set the scene because this little town of Nazareth really wasn't known very much. And there's a history of being aware of Nazareth being this little town. And this is where Jesus grew up. This was his home. And I want you to think as we go through this, that Jesus faced the criticisms of people believing that the hometown boy couldn't make good. I tried to figure out the way to express this. His family, people around him, they didn't believe in him. And when we see this particular thing, we recognize that this is a significant moment in his ministry and that it reveals to us in an interesting way the humanity of Jesus and the challenges that he always faced with his ministry. And I can only imagine how sad that it was for Jesus when his own family rejected him. They didn't believe in him, and they rejected what he taught. So much so that we're going to look at, why was Jesus rejected? What's going on? What does this teach us about our faith? And how can we respond when we face rejection in our Christian life? Now, one thing that's important, and we don't have time to pursue all of this, but I wanted to look at also how Mark in his gospel portrays this event, because he has additional information that Matthew doesn't include. We know that from Mark's gospel that it's on the Sabbath day when Jesus enters the synagogue here. And it talks about mighty works that were worked by his hand. Mark loves that phrase. It was worked by his hand. And Jesus, this is interesting. In Matthew, Jesus is questioned as being the son of the carpenter. Okay. Guess what? In Mark, Jesus himself is also identified as the carpenter. Jesus the carpenter. And I thought about that this week. I thought, you know what? Already at this point, Jesus has been working closely enough with his father Joseph in the carpenter shop. Oh, and I saw this past week, somebody actually took a picture of a carpenter shop in Nazareth of today. Now, I'm sure the tools that are in there now may have been different when Jesus was on the scene, but it did look quite rustic. But by this time, it's pretty clear when Mark says Jesus the carpenter, he had been working enough with his father Joseph that he had that reputation that he was a carpenter. So Mark adds that, which is kind of fascinating. And then he says, notice how Matthew says he did not do many miracles there. Well, Mark adds to that, he didn't do many mighty works there, except, and here's what Mark adds, it's fascinating, that he laid his hands upon a few sick people and healed them. So there was just enough of Jesus' miracles surrounding the Nazareth area that his family and others would have seen that, but because they so rejected him, Jesus decided not to do any more. So it almost reminds me of his teaching to his own disciples, that if people don't receive you, what are they supposed to do? Shake the dust off their feet and go on. Well, you kind of get the picture. That's what's going on here. And then it says that he marveled because of their unbelief. Think about this for a moment, because this is kind of fascinating. Many times people are astonished and they're marveled at Jesus' miracles. Here, the tables are turned. Jesus marvels at their lack of unbelief. And so it's this unbelief that sets the stage for people to reject him. So Jesus returns to his hometown. As Jesus had finished his teachings and his fame had spread, it led him back to his hometown of Nazareth. There is an interesting thing that occurs in the book of Matthew, and if we were in Bible class, I'd take time to show how all this happens. But 5 times in the Gospel of Matthew, it says, and when Jesus had finished these things. And many Bible teachers feel like that those 5 times in Matthew surface some really significant endings of what Jesus has done and transition into a new phase of his ministry. It's pretty important. When he had finished, well, notice this is verse 53. When he had finished these parables, what does he do? He moved on from there. Very important transition in his ministry. The people are amazed at his wisdom and mighty works. In fact, it uses the word amazed. I think the English Standard Version says astonished. But the astonishment, think about it, didn't lead them to faith. It led them to skepticism. And I was thinking, from a human perspective, if we're astonished and we're amazed at some things, it may not lead us in a positive direction to accept what we see. It may take us down the path of dismissal, denial, and unbelief. And that's what happened with them. And we don't know all of the reasons, but the way this narrative is laid out, what seems to be a big factor is they're so familiar with Jesus' family and background. They're like, we know this guy. This can't be happening with him. We know him too well. They thought they did. So they tried, this is interesting, see, they tried to undermine his message and reputation by questioning his origin. And their familiarity with Jesus' earthly background, it created a barrier to accepting his authority. And what's interesting is because it says that even, and Mark makes, I think, a huge point of this, even his brothers and sisters didn't believe him. Even his close family had a journey of faith that started off with not believing, but eventually they believed. That's one of the fascinating insights about the impact of Jesus and his message. People could start at the point of unbelief, skepticism, questioning everything, but it doesn't have to stay there, because notice his family that we know about ended up, James, Jude, and others, ended up writing books of the New Testament later on. So they became people of faith, but that took some time because they had to work through some issues here. And I think the important thing for us to recognize is we have to be very careful in judging people when they don't respond to the message of Jesus as quickly as we think they ought to. Because they may be starting at this very basic level of a lot of skepticism, some unbelief, a raised eyebrow. They're trying to figure this out, and we need to give them time to grow toward belief. And that's certainly what happened here. Now, let's look more closely then at the reason for Jesus' rejection. You'll notice that the people questioned, isn't this the carpenter's son? So they're highlighting their disbelief that someone so ordinary could possess divine power. And I want you to notice that the way this is presented, there's 5 questions, boom, 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 all in a row, real quick. 5 questions. Every one of them questioning his authority and identity. So, where did this man get this wisdom and these miraculous powers? Isn't this the carpenter's son? Isn't his mother's name Mary? And aren't his brothers James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas? And are all his sisters with us? Where did this man get all these things? It's like, we can't believe this. We know him. Where'd he get all this? So they're questioning who he is. And all these 5 questions are piled up all at once to emphasize that. Their problem is the opposite of our contemporary world. They had a problem with Jesus' divinity. He would claim to be the Son of God. And they're like, but he's our brother. What do you mean he's the Son of God? Where we stand historically, we have more of a challenge with his humanity, not his divinity. We've grown up so much hearing about Jesus, the Son of God, and his role in our salvation, death, burial, resurrection, being crucified on the cross. I mean, that's the big story for us. What seems to be hard for us is the flip side. How could he be so human? And the Gospels really bring out the humanity of Jesus. And we need to make sure that we don't skip over his humanity. He was God in the flesh. And that's the reason the gospel present him the way that they do. Son of God, Son of Man. Now, what's interesting is it's not really up to us to figure out that combination. In the history of Christian thought, you can't imagine how people got into fights over trying to figure it out. Like, he's 100%, no, that won't work. He's 50% human, 50% divine. Other people, no, if you look at what he did, it looks like he was 70% divine and 30% human. And people would fight over that. Here's what Scripture does. It doesn't tell us any percentages. It presents him fully divine and fully human. And don't ask me to explain that. That's the mystery of the existence of Jesus, okay? That's what faith accepts. Fully divine, fully human. And here in the question, they refer to his family, mothers and brothers. They just saw him, as I said earlier, just as a local boy. I mean, he's just too common. And so their prejudice and familiarity led to doubt and rejection, despite the evidence. And here's the 2 things. It talks about wisdom and his mighty works. The wisdom, I think, refers to, we'll go back to the end of chapter 7. Remember how they were surprised at Jesus' teaching? Because he taught them as one who had authority, not as the scribes. Well, this word here, wisdom, when they heard that, it would encapsulate all of the wisdom, all of the uniqueness of the power of the teaching of Jesus. Well, not only was his teaching powerful, but so was his works. So wisdom and mighty works. Those things that he did that were out of the ordinary, that caused public ripple. This is why I said earlier, Mark has that little phrase that, he didn't do many miracles there, but he did lay a hand on a few sick folks. Well, when that happened, I'll guarantee you it didn't stay in that house. That rippled out, okay? And so no one else could do what Jesus was doing. No one else had the power to do what Jesus was doing. You may know this, and sometimes the study Bible will have this as a footnote. The word that describes this mighty works or power of Jesus right here, we get our English word dynamite from it. Now, that's kind of fascinating. Jesus' works were dynamite. Well, yes, they were. When you think about what he did, the power he exhibited, And in fact, I discovered this about Matthew. I thought this was really cool. 8 times in the Gospel of Matthew, in reference to the powerful works of Jesus, Matthew uses this word dynamite. Wow. So honestly, when you get through with Gospel Matthew and you ask the question, who is this Jesus we're talking about? Well, one of your answers has to be, he's the Son of God who did these dynamite works, these mighty works that nobody else could do, that only he could perform. And then when we look at his response to the rejection, Jesus' response, he refers to kind of a common proverb, and we've all heard it, that look at how Matthew recorded it. Only in his hometown and his own house is a prophet without honor. I think one other time Jesus says a prophet's without honor in his own country. So we're familiar with that proverb. And because of that, he just decides he's not going to do a whole lot. He recognizes that rejection often comes with lack of faith and understanding, and it is not a deficiency of his message. And it's good for us to hear that. Just because you presented the gospel, the good news to someone, and they don't receive it, it doesn't mean that you didn't say it right. Doesn't mean you didn't introduce them to Jesus in the right way. Their biases are keeping them from hearing the message, and the message itself is not deficient. Here's another really significant thing. The rejection of Jesus foreshadows his ultimate rejection on the cross. I can't imagine on the face of this earth a greater rejection of Jesus than that, being nailed to a cross to die. When we look at that, there's some significant things that come out of it. Jesus was rejected, nailed to the cross. Peter says in his humiliation, his judgment was taken away. He wasn't treated right, total rejection. But notice that he was silent. He didn't accuse those who crucified him. He does feel the rejection, though. Remember where he quotes from Psalm 22, my God, why have you rejected me? Why have you forsaken me? The ultimate expression of rejection and being forsaken. That's why we can say, if we're going through feelings of strong rejection, feeling like we're being forsaken, feeling betrayed, all of those things that go together, Jesus already walked that path. He understands that. And so that's the humanity of where he experienced the total rejection. This is something else that's really fascinating. I really wanted to point this out because in the Gospel of John, he's going to talk about the rejection of Jesus, but not like Matthew and Mark, where they focus on one particular scene like this Sabbath day. Instead, what John does is he'll take these 4 quotes and he scatters them 4 times throughout the gospel, not just in one event. For example, John 7:15. The Jews marvel at him, saying, how is it this man is learning when he's never studied? And then in another passage, 6:42, they said, well, is this not Jesus, the son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know? How does he now say I came down from heaven? So you can see what emphasis John is giving it. John 4:44, for Jesus himself testified that prophet has no honor in his own country. Yeah, but that's on another occasion. And then John 7:5, for even his brothers did not believe in him. So these 4 items, instead of being just in the synagogue scene, they're brought up again in different places in the Gospel of John. Let's look then at the significance of his rejection. Jesus' rejection teaches us that faith often faces opposition especially from those that we know best or those that we associate with. And it can come in different forms. It reminds us that the divine calling, and we're not referring just to Jesus, but our own sense of Christian calling, may be misunderstood or dismissed by those that are closest to us. And rejection like that's a hard thing. It's too easy to feel like that someone is rejecting us and trying to dismiss us as a person. But always remember that the rejection of the Christian goes to the core of the rejection of the message. And despite rejection, notice Jesus remained faithful to his mission. He serves for us as a model of perseverance. And I love to say it this way. When you look at Jesus, what helps each one of us is something like this. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what happens. I'm not turning loose. Doesn't matter how I get rejected. Doesn't matter how I get treated. I'm staying true to the Lord. And we need to say that over and over again. Notice that Jesus' rejection at the cross was designed by God to save us from ultimate rejection at the judgment day. He got rejected, so ultimately we don't have to. Think about that. So as we come to the conclusion of this lesson, Jesus' experience at Nazareth encourages us to stand firm in our faith even when misunderstood or rejected. And we don't know the place, the time, the person, or the event where that's going to happen, but we just need to be ready. It may be in personal conversation. It may be how somebody has slandered your name. I mean, I was thinking this week, what are all the ways that rejection can be felt? And I suspect if we had time this morning and you could hold your hand up and say, oh boy, let me tell you a time in my life, it would be interesting how it would be different for all of us. But we felt this before. It is a challenge to remain faithful. Notice the next thing that's important is that his rejection was part of his divine mission, leading ultimately to salvation for all. Jesus knew ahead of time that he was going to be ultimately rejected and nailed to the cross. Sometimes I think one of the things that mitigates against Christians growing is when they have to face for the first time any kind and any form of rejection, they're not sure what to do with it. And that can be a tough thing to work through. There was a Christian writer, I think he wrote a book called, the title of it is Trauma to the Soul. And he has a chapter in there where he deals with something that I had never seen any other Christian writer deal with, but it's so true. He deals with how do you handle in your Christian journey when you get disillusioned with people at church? Because he makes a claim, way too many young Christians opt out and quit because they get disillusioned that the church is filled with people. Well, guess what? That's all God's got to work with is people. And what we have to recognize is our own experiences of rejection. If we're open to it, God can use those for our further spiritual growth. And as one writer used this imagery that I really like, it's called the resiliency muscle of faith, that everything you experience just keeps on building up your muscles faithfully. I'm hoping that principle is true as I'm trying to go and work out with Nancy in silver sneakers. So far, I haven't experienced the muscle strength yet, but I'm hanging in there. Every time I go exercise, I'm anticipating I'm getting a little better, maybe. Same thing with life and faith. Everything we experience, we can ask God to help us add to the resiliency of our faith muscle so that one victory leads to another. And we're never going to give up, no matter what our own experience of rejection looks like. So let us draw strength from his example and remain faithful and trusting in God's greater purpose. This is another thing that Jesus was able to do. Remember Hebrews 12 right at the beginning? It says, Jesus, who for the joy set before him, endured the shame of the cross. He endured it. Why could he? Well, not only was he the Son of God, but he knew God's greater purpose. He knew. He was willing to suffer for the greater purpose. But it was even in the face of the shame that was there. Verse 57 in Matthew 13 has a real important word. They took offense at him. We get our English word scandal from that word. They took offense at him. For many people, Jesus is a scandal. That's why Paul could say, remember when we were studying through 1 Corinthians, guess what? For the Greeks, Jesus was foolishness. And for the Jews, it was stumbling block. Jesus was a scandal to them. And here, his family and hometown took offense at him. He was a scandal. Well, we don't like to be parts of a scandal. We don't like our name to be part of a scandal. For Jesus, it was scandalous to believe in someone like Jesus. So let's look at some practical application. And as I was thinking through this, I thought, wow, all of us could add to this practical application. Number one, like Jesus, we should respond to rejection with humility, love, and unwavering commitment to God's purpose. Now, I know for people we couldn't do that. I suppose for Jesus, he could have used his divine power and said, okay, after this Nazareth synagogue scene, I don't like this thing called rejection, so I'm going to use my divine power and keep all rejection at arm's length, and I won't have to experience this anymore. But he didn't. We don't have the power nor the choice to keep other people from rejecting us, do we? We can't control what other people say or do. What we can do is, by the power of the Spirit and the risen Lord within us and the purposes of God in our heart and life, we can stay true to our Christian commitment. Then number two, we must remember that rejection is not a reflection of our worth or God's power, but it's often a sign of spiritual blindness on the part of others who do not get us. Do y'all remember, and it was a lot last year, I don't remember seeing it recently, remember the TV commercials that were about Jesus, and it would make a statement, then it would say, he gets us. Jesus gets us. And it was a TV campaign. Well, when people go through rejection, and when Jesus was rejected, people didn't get him. And sometimes we're rejected because people don't get us. They don't understand. They don't appreciate. They misrepresent. There is a signing of motives, all kinds of things that go with rejection. Well, what we have to understand, it's not a reflection of our worth or God's power, never. And God gives us then the strength to be able to go forward. Number three, we're called to trust in God's plan, to continue to share his love, and not to be discouraged by rejection. Remember, the Apostle Paul reminded Timothy, all who live godly will suffer persecution, and that persecution comes in all kinds of forms. One of the many is rejection itself. So here's the question we all have to ask ourselves. I'm not going to end up on the cross like Jesus, I don't think, and you probably won't either. But what does rejection look like for me? How is Satan tempted to use it against me? How am I tempted to let it impact me to doubt my faith, doubt God's power, and doubt my own spiritual journey? So how has this element of rejection surfaced its ugly head in my own life? And I need to come to grips with that because you've heard me say before, I'm sure Satan's got his bag of tools. Okay, he's up to stuff. And one of the tools that he's got in his bag is called rejection. If he can make you, and I want you to think of people that you have known over the years. Something happened at church, they felt rejected, so they quit. No longer attend church, no longer want to have anything to do with the family of God. Sometimes there's a sad thing with that, and that happens with ministers. I was reading of a minister who was rejected by his church, went to church on Sunday. Church didn't want him. They asked him to leave that Sunday publicly. He left. The next day was Monday. He put his books of his whole library out on the curb for the dumpster to pick up, the dump truck to pick up, and in his life, and he had a heart attack and died on Tuesday. I was like, wow. No matter who we are, where we are in our station in life, we're going to experience forms of rejection. But we cannot let Satan use that to destroy us. Jesus didn't let it destroy him. And here's the interesting thing. The people that put Jesus to death, they were like, oh man, we got this thing all set up. We got rid of him and now we can go forward and do what we want to do. Little did they know that their participation in the ultimate rejection of Jesus was doing what? Fulfilling the ultimate purposes of God. So let's say this, and I've been thinking about this week. Sometimes things that are hard for us to deal with, if we are open to it, God works through it to accomplish the purposes of his kingdom through us in ways that we never dreamed of. And it's all because we're hanging on, being faithful, persevering, and we're not letting rejection, throw us out the window, so to speak. We're staying true. We're staying faithful. This is an amazing event in the life of Jesus. And I'm hoping that this is very typical. As we look through the ministry of Jesus, we're going to see the way that he responds to people with things that really challenge us deeply in our spiritual life. And this is really crucial, I think, in our own spiritual journey.